am the official moderator of this, but Greg is the organizer and will make points at various points. Clara Saraiva in Lisbon and I basically alternate taking responsibility for these webinars. It started in 2020 under the WCAA, the World Council of Anthropological Associations. And it had a lot to do with a pandemic. I think we actually started in, I don't remember whether it was March or April of 2020. Initially it was about every month and a half. And over the last couple of years, I think we have switched it to being a World Anthropological Union webinar and pretty much every other month. But that's just some background. Okay, I don't know why. Anyway, this is a little unusual in some ways, given the past history of it being usually Clara until I joined. When the moderator would sort of choose a topic in conjunction with the WCAA organizing committee and so forth, and basically find some speakers, and we would do it that way. But in this particular case, and I think it followed Giovanna's on education the last time, we actually have a particular topic and an organizer. So I will be fairly backgrounded here. Greg is largely the organizer and works on these various things. I did want to basically thank you all, maybe especially Greg, for taking this on. We should have a very lively discussion. I do want, since I asked people to give me bios and they went through Greg and Greg sent them to me, I'm going to introduce the speakers in the order in which they have agreed to serve. Clara usually did this from right to left, from east to west because of the time zones. But Amanda, who's in British Columbia, apparently wanted to go first. So amazingly, special thanks. She will be first, and then Anne, then Lara, Stephen, and Vila, as far as I can tell. Anyway, I will do this, and then Greg will take over, okay? For those of you who don't know, maybe I should start with Greg. Greg is a quite renowned practicing anthropologist, applied anthropologist, who was, from his accent, if you know, he was obviously born and raised in the US, but has been in Perth, Australia for many, many years. He is also a member of the IUAES Executive Committee, International Union of Anthropological and Ethnological Sciences, quite a mouthful, and also now a member of the Steering Committee of WOW, the World Anthropological Union, and very intellectually as well as organizationally involved, and I'm very grateful. Okay, so Amanda, I'm going to read these. Amanda Chong, is that how you pronounce your last name? Chong? Yeah, okay. Is an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of British Columbia, UBC. She does research on the impact of documentation and legal status on people's lives, working with stateless, undocumented, and refugee communities in Southeast Asia and North America. Her work has appeared in venues such as Social Problems, these are journals, Social Problems, Sociological Theory, International Migration Review, and Ethnic and Racial Studies. She got her PhD in Sociology and Social Policy at Princeton University in 2019, but I should say, I know these are typically anthropologists, but everybody here is, whether they're officially anthropologists or not, they're sort of anthropologically influenced. Anyway, our second speaker is Anne Baltasar in Spanish and Portuguese, I think, but probably known as Baltasar. Is pursuing her PhD in Gender Studies and Social Justice at the University of Malaya, Malaysian University, researching issues related to statelessness, legal identification, and child labor, particularly their impact on women and children in Sabah. She's a founder of ANAC, a civil society organization advocating for the rights of non-citizen children in Sabah through policy, lobbying, legal casework, and community engagement. Her work spans grassroots to policy levels, including addressing gender-based violence and human trafficking, social development and organization, and sustainable labor practices. She has published in Ethnic and Racial Studies, again, Genus, the Journal of Population Sciences, and the Statelessness and Citizenship Review. Third will be Lara Tianchi Chen, a professor at Waseda University and founder of the NPO Stateless Network. Lara is born and raised in Japan, lived as a stateless person for over 30 years. She completed her PhD in international political economy and started researching the lives of stateless people from an anthropological approach in order to deepen her understanding of this issue and to make apparent the disconnect between the laws regarding statelessness and reality of people's lived experience. She published Stateless, so Singapore NSU Press, based on her own experience and her research. Fourth will be Stephen P. McIntyre, a PhD student at the Graduate School of Social Sciences at Hitotsubashi University. And Steve was born in Osaka. I think that's where Junji is here, right? Yes. Steve was born in Osaka, Japan, and lived in Japan until he was 13 before his family moved to Australia. He has studied for various degrees, including a Master of Development Studies and a bachelor's degree in social work. Since 2015, he has been studying at Hitotsubashi University, researching the experiences of Rohingya from Burma and Kurds from Turkey living in Japan and their encounters with the immigration system in Japan. They have published 3 articles in Japanese, including 2 articles on Rohingya and 1 article on Kurds and their experiences in Japan. And last but not least is Vilashini Somia, Dr. Vilashini Somia, a feminist anthropologist and senior lecturer at the Gender Studies program at the University of Malaya. She earned her PhD from the National University of Singapore, and her research focuses on underrepresented narratives of women, migrants, and Bordeans living in the interior. She co-edited Revisiting COVID-19 in Malaysia, which came out in 2023, and Sabak from the Ground, 2020 elections, and The Politics of Survival, which came out in 2021. Her first single author book called Irregular Migrants and the Sea at the Borders of South Malaysia, published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2022, won the University of Malaya Award for Outstanding Achievement for Best Social Science Book of 2022, and has received international acclaim and reviews. Dr. Sumia is currently working on her 4th book, which explores the lives and resilience of Bordean women. Beyond academia, she writes ethnographic articles on Malaysia's socio-political landscape. Okay, Greg, it's all yours.
Okay.
All right. Amanda, you go first, right? The early morning person, Michelle, will appreciate. Really, guys, it's 7 in the morning, 7:15, I guess, now in the morning.
No worries.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. As Virginia pointed out, I'm a sociologist, but I really love hanging out with anthropologists and learning from how anthropologists think about these topics of citizenship and legal status and documentation and categories. So thank you so much, Greg, for the invitation to be a part of this conversation. I'm really heartened to see all of this interest in this topic of statelessness within the anthropological community. And it's very timely that we are convening this panel because we're 1 year out from the 2014 to 2024 UN Refugee Agency Global Action Plan to End Statelessness. And in these past 10 years, a lot of progress has been made to resolve this human rights crisis in which millions of people around the world do not have membership to any nation state. But we're still living in, as people obviously realize, a time of unprecedented mobility and displacement in which national borders are still being moved and contested. And this is going to continue to result in new causes and forms of statelessness around the world. And this is why it's so important for anthropologists and sociologists and qualitative researchers to be studying this issue alongside legal scholars and political theorists who have traditionally dominated the conversations scholastically about statelessness. And what we contribute, I think, is an attentiveness to how categories of stateless or citizen are experienced and negotiated below the formal letter of the law, and how these categories can be ambiguous and flexible and unstable and contestable, especially from the perspective of stateless people themselves. And lastly, before I move on to the other panelist presentations, so we're going to go more deeply into their particular cases, I wanted to note that one of my pet peeves about the way that statelessness is talked about, especially within humanitarian campaigns, is that they tend to portray stateless people as vulnerable victims who lack a conception of their identity and belonging, that they're, quote, nowhere people or have nowhere to belong or are legally invisible. But ethnographic research that I've conducted in Malaysia and Brunei and Myanmar, and research that other colleagues have conducted, including those who are on this panel today, show that contrary, that stateless people have very strong convictions about their attachments to the lands in their communities, and that they have incredible creative capacities for political action and political voice, even or especially in the face of their abject political exclusion from lacking the right to have the right to be political. And so this is hopefully what our agenda for an anthropology of statelessness can continue to shed light upon going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Anne?
Okay.
I think you're
So can you hear me? Just
Yes.
can
Yes.
share my slides. Yeah.
Yes.
Can you see my slides too?
Now we can, or now I can.
Yeah. Okay. So hi everyone. I'm Anne, and I come from Sabah, Malaysia. And as you see, Sabah, it's much closer to the Philippines as well as Indonesia. So a lot of those affected by statelessness in Sabah come from these the bordering countries, Philippines and Indonesia. So in Sabah, one third of Sabah's 3.4 million population are non-citizens. So that's 1 in 3 people. So, and we estimate that at least half of them are stateless, are undocumented, and maybe even half of them are children. So we're looking at 300,000 of children who are affected probably affected or at risk of statelessness in Sabah. And so in Sabah, in Malaysia as a whole, it's not just the absence of citizenship. It is deeply entrenched. It's multi-generational. We see that families are in 4 or 5 generations of statelessness, and it affects a child's access to basic rights. You cannot get proper education, basic healthcare such as vaccination, childhood vaccination, and we've had outbreaks because of that, and yeah, freedom of movement as well. So my work focus a lot on children, statelessness in children. These, over the 15 years of doing this work, these are some of the words from the children themselves. So when asking about citizenship, those who are not being arrested by the police, or I was born in my country, but I do not know my citizenship, and I'm big now that I can be arrested. So there's a lot of fear of moving around, because then when they reach the age of 12 and they don't have their national identification cards, they can be arrested. And at least 1/4 of one of the studies that I've did before, children have experienced close family members being arrested and being taken away. Even though this sounds a bit hopeless, but we have seen along the years organizations such as ANAC, the organization that I founded, are led by stateless young persons themselves, children of migrants, and we more and more of this we have seen this movement more and more, where affected communities, affected young persons especially, are trying to find, are voicing out. We've also recently, last year, one previously stateless girl spoke in Parliament on the Constitution amendment. So more and more, we are trying to ensure that the voices of children and young persons and stateless themselves can be heard in a bigger platform. And looking at how this affects women and girls, they shoulder most of the household responsibilities in addition to work or labor, as well as school, outside home. They are married off much earlier in their childhood and more vulnerable to exploitation. And mothers often carry the emotional and logistical burden of navigating statelessness. So they try to get the children into school, trying to get them proper health care. So this is what we see. And why this matters? Because it's not just a legal condition, it's a systemic and it's systemic, and it is an experience of exclusion and disempowerment. And we are working really hard with communities to try to create space for voices to be heard, to offer solutions to the government. But we need a broader systemic change to take account the voices, especially children who are usually not nobody wants to hear them. And so we try to be that space, and also their families. And that's all for now. Thank you.
What language is that?
Kotahuadan. I'm half Kadazan and half Filipino. So Kotahuadan is thank you.
In what language? Sorry.
In Kadazan. It's an indigenous language here. Yeah, and
Right,
you're
right.
right. My name is Spanish influence because of my Filipino heritage.
Oh, it is. Yeah, Baltasar. I was born in Cuba.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And Greg, do you want to say anything now? Shall we keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Lara, you're third. Lara Tianchi Chen, right?
Okay. Hi, hello everyone, and thank you very much for Greg to inviting me to give me a chance to share my thought with you. Today, I want to share two things with you. Since I'm born in Japan and raised in Japan, and I became stateless since 1 years old until 32, until I naturalized to Japanese. I was living as a stateless for over 30 years, and I started the research on statelessness since 1999. At that time when I started, I couldn't find any reference. I only found two like a book that when I type in the library, I only find two articles, which is the Convention of Statelessness, like 1954 Convention and 1961 Convention. That's all. And then we couldn't find any article at the time. And so since I research on this, I realized people always have the negative image on statelessness and have negative image on these people. But being lived as a stateless person, I always question about this, because there are some stateless people are living with a legal document, but still discriminated by the society. How can we change this? This is one thing I want to share with you and discuss with you. And the second thing is that about the citizenship. We take nation state and citizenship for granted, and not many people really question on it, if the system of the citizenship or nation states is still rational, or really, how to say that, still, how I can put it, still rational, or still useful for our, like, a global age. People are moving, and then some people have a dual nationality, and some people, yeah, in the other side of the coin, we do have stateless people. Then why don't we change? Why don't all the nation states change the system of the nationality law, and then make the big change of this, that as an anthropologist, to see all the stateless kids in Sabah or in Japan, who are under, they born under the mixed marriage, and the parents with the out of the wedlock. So I think how we as an anthropologist can throw the question to the legal studies people, or the nation state, the government, say, yeah, people cannot choose where you born, and who under which parents they're born. Then why is the system still rational? And also, because I belong campaign that UNHCR are run until last year, they put the word, say, to eliminate stateless. I'm a bit, as being a stateless for over 30 years, I'm a bit shocked to be put as to eliminate us stateless people. So can we somehow to think about this issue from the other side, from the stateless people's point of view? Yeah, that's all. Two points I want to share with you.
Thanks, Larry. You'll have a chance to talk again. One thing I guess I wanted to say before we move on to Steve is it would be helpful. I think there are lots of people today, here it's morning, I was going to say this morning, but I know it's not morning elsewhere. But there are lots of people listening in, participating. And it would be helpful, actually, it would be helpful to a lot of us if you were to use the chat, not only to write questions or criticisms, but also to identify yourself, what country you're in or from, etc. Because I know I don't know a number of people here, but I do know some, and they're from lots of different places. So just a thought. Okay, Stephen, your turn.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm very happy to be here, although I don't know if my presentation is going to be very good, but I'll do my best. So yeah, I have been, as the introduction said, I've been researching Rohingya people from Burma, Myanmar, and Kurdish people from Turkey. And the numbers of such people in Japan are not large. And oh, by the way, I'm studying as a sociology student, so I'm not anthropologist. However, I've basically been doing qualitative research and interviews, and that's how I've been conducting my research. So yeah, I guess there's a lot of affinity. And I was asked to talk a little bit about the background of such groups. So although there is an estimated 300 or more Rohingya in Japan, and the Kurdish community from Turkey is said to be about 2,000 or more. So both of those are not huge, even in terms of so-called, wealthy receiving countries when you compare them to other countries. So why do these people leave their own countries and come to Japan? Well, I mean, the Rohingya case, I guess, is well known. The situation of Rohingya has been, I guess, difficult since the country gained independence after colonialism, after the Second World War. However, various incidents of massacres and expulsion have led to huge numbers of Rohingya people being in protracted refugee situations since the 1970s at least. And of course, most recently in 2017, there was the mass exodus and also what's been described as a genocide of Rohingya people, and the largest refugee camp in the world in Bangladesh with over 1 million people. And then there's also hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Rohingya living in various countries of the third world or global south, where they are not protected, or where those countries are not signatories to the Refugee Convention. Kurdish people have also actually suffered various forms of persecution from the Republic of Turkey since its formation. Various famous massacres occurred, especially in the early days of the Republic. But then there's been ongoing persecution, denial of cultural and linguistic and national rights. Attempts for independence and then autonomy have been suppressed. And that sort of put those involved or thought to be involved in such activity have been the target of persecution. Also, conflicts between groups such as the well-known Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, and the government has led to huge numbers of people being forced to migrate internally in Turkey, hundreds of thousands of people, and large numbers of people fleeing as refugees, mainly to countries in Western Europe, such as Germany or Japan or the Netherlands and so on. But yes, only a very small number of people have come to Japan, and they're the ones that I've been focusing on in my research. And I guess I've talked about I do focus on the historical background in my research using life story interviews, because I wanted to, get the experiences from the people I interview of why they left their country, where they went to, and then also why they came to Japan, which is the main focus of my own research and their experiences in Japan. But I did want to have the full story included, not just focusing on the receiving country experience. Basically, I guess it's a study of, relating it to statelessness, the Arendtian idea of, the right to have rights, and then the lack of rights. But then in terms of a more sort of experiential kind of perspective, I suppose. Recently, I've been a bit interested in Sayad's work with, his well-known book, The Suffering of the Immigrant, and talking about the double absence that migrants, refugees, and also stateless people may experience as they lose their country of origin, or they feel a loss from their country of origin, and then they also don't feel fully incorporated or fully accepted, or feel that they don't belong in the country which they've come to live in. My research then is not so much focusing on that sort of emotional aspect or psychological aspect, although that obviously is an important part, but the important aspect is the legal mechanisms, or lack of protection, or lack of rights or full rights, because they have to live as asylum seekers on precarious immigration statuses for extended periods of time in Japan. And they may also be subject to periodic immigration detention, and then released from detention, and then continue to live precariously in the country as they seek asylum for many, many years. And so that has been one major focus. So the sort of other scholars have talked about permanent temporariness. Yes, I'm over time, and I've been focusing on that. And there is also ongoing issues for people who get regularized status, because it's not easy to gain Japanese nationality either. But I'll stop there. Thank you for your time. Sorry that I went over time.
All right, we're a little flexible, but don't really want you to go for like 10 or 15 minutes.
No, I don't want to either. So thanks for saving me from myself.
Oh, no, I didn't even know you would see this. Vila, I think you are Well, you're not last, but yeah,
Oh, I
Dr.
would have
Vilas.
loved to be in the last, you know? It's not
Well,
okay.
well,
Somebody
you are
say,
the fifth. You are the fifth.
thank you. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever it is you are at this moment. My name is Villa, and I'm a feminist anthropologist. And just like Anne, I too am from the state of Sabah, which is located in Borneo, a very Googleable part of the world. And as an anthropologist in the recent years, I've been very interested in the issue of oppression. Now, I know I said I could put up slides, but I've decided against it simply because I suck at it. So I guess you'll just have to put up with my voice for the next 5 minutes. I do a lot of study of oppression, and it really started in this area of studying the national other. And of course that, you know, just like Anne, we come from a state which has been depicted as having a migration crisis or a stateless crisis for many, many years. And so, you know, my anthropological interest had been in the ways in which people are resilient within that kind of label. You know, I think what I've always been I've gravitated towards as an ethnographer and an anthropologist is the way in which I think also my training as a non-Western scholar, my training as a person of color, my training as somebody who's located in the global most is using the tool of anthropology to really reject, I think, these very old, repetitive, reductive labels of stateless persons, you know, like the legal ghost or a nowhere person, worse, an alien, right? And what we know of this is that there's always this idea that in state making, there has to be an othering in order to keep, you know, people in the inside. This is, you know, Homo Sacer 101. I remember reading quite recently the work of Judith Bayer, who was really talking about the way in which nation states sustains itself by casting out the unwanted, right? So we're always sort of fixated in the study of statelessness as this idea of legal exclusion.
Yeah.
But beyond this idea of legal exclusion, of course, statelessness is an incredibly emotional, spiritual, physical marooning, right? And this whole idea of being cast away, being left behind, and this idea of being stranded, at least in the place where I work in Sabah, is this idea of being stranded. And so this strandedness within the study of statelessness is what carves out narratives of the dangerous, the harmful, the threatening of an entire community. Particularly in the communities that I work with, I've sort of noticed and paid attention to and very in support of these counter narratives that are coming up, because this whole idea of marooning and strandedness, which, you know, places them in a very difficult position, is reclaimed by this idea of movement, that the kin and the collective have a presence in moving. And while one cannot move from one nation state to another without being labeled, without going through this multi-layers of being labeled criminal or dangerous, what I think an anthropology of statelessness essentially reveals is this very complex entanglement of state and identity and belonging when one wants to reclaim movement. So I think, or at least what I'm trying to argue for today, is that when one locates movement within statelessness, it is a sort of a position that one takes to fight off against these ideas of the illicit or the threatening, right? We want to regulate stateless communities. We want to regulate stateless populations because that's the position that the state takes. And there are also many people within other disciplines that also understand the needs of the state in that regulation. But essentially, movement is inherent. In fact, I argue it's necessary. It is dire for those in which who need to move. So some of the work that I have been recently delving into is a very unique intersection of statelessness, where I study transgender sex workers who are also themselves Muslim stateless people. And in a country like Malaysia, this, of course, is a triple threat of an existence, because essentially we want stateless people to be seen as fixed in place. And there is constantly a resistance of that in multiple layers. And so, they seek movement of the self, they seek movement of the kin, of the collective, of the identity, in order to reclaim these positions. So I'm not going to go too much into this. I understand this is going to be a long night, but that's essentially where I'm going to leave us with. I think this is my 5 minutes. So thank you. You're muted, Virginia.
You're muted, Virginia.
I did mute. Greg, did you want to say anything now?
I'll say a couple of things, just as a sort of discussion. I mean, another reason for the timeliness of this is we're just about a little over 1 year out of the World Congress on Statelessness, which was held in Kuala Lumpur, the kind of satellite city of Sunway in Malaysia. And it was certainly apparent there that lawyers and legal scholars were the dominant presence. And although social scientists were certainly there, and we were in many panels, I thought it was more of a muted presence. And I think, as has come out in these presentations, that we have a lot to offer in understanding that there is more at issue than just legal citizenship, that there are issues of belonging that have to be confronted. And we're developing the conceptual tools. We can invoke some that have already been used. I have found Renato Rosaldo's notion of cultural citizenship as something that is can kind of get at the fact that even if people do become legal citizens, that they're often still rejected because they don't conform to the norms of cultural citizenship. So I think a social science perspective is particularly important in this. Anne's presentation highlighted one thing that some other researchers on statelessness have also shown. When you have a quote like, well, I guess I'm an adult now and I can be arrested, it shows that, people's own understandings of their statelessness evolve through different life stages. That in a sense, that there's a kind of acquisition through your life of an understanding of the full ramifications of your position. But that, it's not necessarily negative. It also, there's an unfolding of the potentialities for exercising agency in order to work with that position and such. The final thing I'd like to say at this point is on the issue of actually researching with stateless people. I've worked with migrants. I've worked with indigenous people in Indonesia, in central Kalimantan and central Sulawesi and such. My work with stateless people in Tun Sekaran Marine Park, the Bajau Laut in eastern Sabah, was in many ways the most interactionally difficult I've ever had. I don't think I ever fully gained their trust, and that has to do with my positionality as being a foreigner, as being an older male, and also the fact that my sponsor, you have to have a sponsor as a foreign researcher, was Sabah Parks, and I was often communicating with rangers and such on the islands off which these people were living. So it's quite difficult to build trust. And this is where, for example, Lara's work, which takes an autoethnographic perspective, is particularly important, because I think it is a field that does conduce to the importance of autoethnography, of people's own voices and stateless people themselves becoming conceptually aware of how they can contribute quite cogent social scientific formulations of their own predicaments and such. So I'll leave it at that.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, as promised, right, we do have a second round, maybe a little shorter than the first round, but I want to follow the order. If Amanda is not asleep yet, I want to follow the order we used before. So Amanda and Lara, Stephen and Vila, if you have, I don't know, if you have anything else to add, if you want to comment on other presenters' things, if whatever you want to do is fine. We typically say about 3 minutes, but okay, Amanda, any thoughts? Anything
This is
to
a
add?
very nice collection of different examples of how the different instantiations of statelessness in different contexts. And something that ties a lot of these cases together is the how colonialism
Mhm.
acts as this backdrop against which all of these cases originate. And I think it's important to focus on stateless people intellectually because their experiences really highlight the fictiveness of the national borders from which they are excluded or through which they fall. And they also reveal the kind of nation statist logics that pervade the way we think about our places in the world conventionally, and the way that we formulate solutions to resolving statelessness. But as Vila said, if we think about the way that stateless people understand their being and their belonging in ways that transcend the limits of nation status borders, we can really highlight the colonial origins of these exclusions in ways that show how we're all really disadvantaged, or well, we're all confined by these nation status borders, and maybe we can think of other alternative ways of organizing human political life that don't continue to perpetuate the violence and the exclusion that these nation status borders have wrought.
Thank you, Amanda. Let's see, where's Anne? There you are.
Thank-
You have any
Thank-
further thought?
I just think want to share a bit about how I appreciate all the academic work done on statelessness, and because as I'm more of like I'm in an NGO. That's my background, that I'm trying to look for solutions, trying to fix problems in my country. And actually how I got into research was because when we were advocating for the issues, we were asked for data. So they were saying, okay, you NGOs, you just make noise and you don't, it's just one case or two cases. So that's why I went into research, did my master's and then my PhD currently on child labor, so that we would have data that would help our advocacy and help to create change. And I think what I feel is powerful with this process also is that we as practitioners, we work with communities and we work with affected persons, and through it provides different platforms through advocacy as well as through research. I've worked with Amanda a long time, and I like that she keeps on engaging people who are on the ground, and people who would never have been able to write an academic paper, but through platforms like this, people on the ground are also able to voice out their own situations, and especially also for children, people who would not have had the space to be able to be heard. So so that has been driving me, trying to realize my supervisor for my PhD, and then trying now to finish my PhD now on child labor. And it also relates a lot. Children in plantations are also affected on the issue of statelessness. And yeah, I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Lara?
Okay, thank you. I just realized someone asked why I can be stateless from 1 to 32 in Japan. I just want to give the just quick background. I'm born under my parents are Chinese from mainland China, and then they moved to Taiwan after World War II and Civil War in China. And then my father moved from Taiwan to Japan in 50s, and my mom also moved to Japan in 60s. And I was born in Japan in 1971, just right before Japan cut the relationship with Taiwan, People's Republic of China, ROC China, Republic of China, Taiwan, and they shipped their diplomatic relationship with People's Republic of China. At that time in Japan, there's many overseas Chinese having a ROC passport. They face the problem, say, the country where we reside are not gonna recognize our nationality. So many overseas Chinese shift their nationality to People's Republic or naturalized to Japanese. And now my family, my father didn't want to shift to PRC China, and my mom didn't want to shift to Japanese. So we end up became stateless. That's why I became stateless from 1 until I naturalized to Japanese in 32 or 33. That's how I became stateless. And I was permanent resident, but stateless in Japan. So I can go to school. I have I can move around with a travel document, but not passport. But once I stuck in the airport, I couldn't enter any country. That's how I realized I'm really stateless. And then through my NGO activity and also through my research, I realized there's a legal stateless people with legal residentship and stateless people without legal residentship. They have the very different life and different way of thinking and different, totally different. One or like with the legal status, then we have a stable life, and we tend to have identity as a stateless. Sometimes we don't really want to get some people. I know some Korean stateless. They ethnically Korean, but he didn't want to get the nationality, either South Korea, North. So he's happy to be stateless. We have this kind of people. Me too. I was reluctant to naturalize to Japanese, but I did because I want to conduct the research in Brunei, research in Sabah, to visit Bajau people and visit Bruneian, the stateless in Brunei, and visit the Golan Heights and met to interview those stateless people in Golan. That's why I decided to naturalize. So, and in the other side, we have the illegal, like without document stateless people. They do want to get some kind of status or citizenship. So we have different kind. That's what I want to share with you. And then I think if there's any system can give, there's any better system that can issue to the stateless people, yeah, for they have a easy way of living, the way to live. That's what I'm thinking. No, yeah, time to time. Yeah.
Thanks, Laura.
I'm gonna stop here. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's all right. Thanks, Laura. Before I turn to Stephen for a second, I just realized as you were talking that I don't know that I ever thought of myself that way, but between July 10th, 1960 and February 1969, I was like you. I had no recognized citizenship. I was born in Cuba. My family left. It was only in February 1969 that I became a U.S. citizen. So just a thought. Well, I had permanent residency here, permanent residency in Uruguay. I had two things that looked like passports, but they were basically just recognized by the state. So anyway, so we can talk about that later. But Stephen, yes. You're muted.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Yes. Yeah. Thanks once again for the wonderful speakers. Actually, I thought I might follow up because Lara is, I'm in the same organization as Lara's Stateless Network anyway, but I thought I'd follow up with, just because my research is also in Japan, and I'd follow up on the issue of immigration status, basically, because in the end, my research is focused on refugees, refugee migrants, refugee studies from a sociological point of view. So in my research, one of the most important things is the lack of rights for non-citizens who then lack immigration status as they seek asylum because they are undocumented or irregular migrants, or considered, illegal by the government, and then that's why they suffer precarious statuses, and that's why they suffer detention periodically in Japan as well, and this can lead to deaths in detention and so on, and it has led to that in the worst case, but also extended periods, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years without a visa is, I know this happens in other countries as well, and the numbers are far larger in other countries, but this also happens in Japan. And so that can be the most difficult, even among asylum seekers. You can be an asylum seeker and have some sort of visa that can be relatively good, even though it's still precarious compared to somebody who doesn't have immigration status at all, who's irregular, or who's considered to be a visa overstayer or whatever, and they're subject to deportation orders and things like that. So then if you have regularization through getting refugee status or humanitarian status or something, obviously that improves your life considerably. So then I suppose the thing is the rights of non-citizens, or the question of the rights of non-citizens, or the rights of denizens, if you like, Thomas Hammer, denizenship, so how can that be expanded? The idea, for example, that in countries, ironically, like Germany, where, the ethnically sort of focused system actually led to more rights for non-citizens than in countries like the US or Britain, where gaining nationality is sort of assumed. So sometimes there can be opportunities to extend rights to non-citizens that maybe doesn't happen in some places where they assume everyone's going to become a citizen. And then Greg already mentioned the cultural citizenship aspect, which exists in countries like France, which claim to have secularism even though they don't. So these issues continue anyway. So the rights of non-citizens is, I guess, something to be advocated for, I suppose. I just thought I'd close on that. Okay, thank you.
Oh, Virgin, you're muted.
You're muted.
Okay, Vila, you're muted too. Okay.
Hi, hey, thanks everybody for that. I mean, I don't know where to go with it since everybody said such brilliant things. But I think I you know, sort of taking a second to really draw from everybody's points. I think, you know, personally, my position in the kind of work we do as not just anthropologists, but also ethnographers, and if not ethnographers, researchers in the in the area of statelessness, is that I've recently sort of entered an area where I've become very mindful, I think, and I've shared this a lot with my students and other friends who are also working on issues of the non-citizen or statelessness, is that I'm concerned about the ways in which scholars can, if not careful, infantilize stateless communities and this idea of statelessness. Now, I'm very grateful that there's people like yourself, Virginia, and definitely you, Lara, who have yourself lived the experience of statelessness. But, you know, the way I sort of understand it is that I think too often, as the scholar activist arena sort of comes out and we have these frameworks, that they've also become very extractive, I think, of the ways in which we are exploring statelessness, right? I just, you know, as somebody who's worked on statelessness in Borneo for a long time, as a Bornean who was reminded in grad school that I'm a native anthropologist just by way of being there, which is in itself completely problematic, is that we take people's stories, but we certainly don't make enough of an effort or a space for their voices within these intellectual spaces. And in also empowering the community themselves to create intellectual property in these spaces in itself, right? I think, for example, language is never neutral. And the way we talk about statelessness in, by the way, English at this very moment is excluding and of many people living with statelessness today. You know, I'm appreciative that Greg brought up this whole thing about the conference on statelessness that was held last year in Malaysia that did not have stateless people attend, right? And so stateless persons are the most affected, and ultimately academia in itself remains structurally inaccessible. So, you know, I am mindful that this is a great space for us to explore the ways in which we ourselves are also stuck and marooned and stranded within these very outdated frames. And I understand these problems persist globally, right? They are global phenomenon, and newer forms of statelessness continue to emerge. I urge us to think about Trump 2.0, for instance, right? Really creating these new ripples of statelessness that are existing. But we ourselves, as scholars of these spaces, we ourselves, as people who are dedicated to seeing this change, must evolve within our area of analysis, within our capacity to write about this. So I'm just sort of ending it as a scholar activist. And I think it's our job not just to critique and to offer information and to bring back to the table this sort of very descriptive information. But I think also this is a really good time for us to reassess and be reflective about the ways in which we can open doors. We need to step aside if we have to. We have to ensure that communities themselves can theorize from their own lives within this area of statelessness, because anything less is performative. So thanks very much, everyone.
Okay, thank you. We're not done yet, but thank you very much, Vila. Okay, Greg, what do you think? Want to say anything?
I'll just make a very brief comment, and it's bouncing off Amanda's problematization of the Westphalian nation-state system. I just want to mention that something else that the study of statelessness problematizes is how we align ourselves with indigeneity. Stateless peoples like the Bajau Laut in Sabah are not recognized as indigenous. And in fact, a lot of the politics of Sabah is the politics of who is Sabahan, who are the real Sabahan people. I mean, I was quite taken aback when talking to settled Bajau who are citizens, who are usually, in most categorizations, would be seen as indigenous people of Sabah, although some groups may not even admit that, the incredible hostility to the Bajau Laut, that that these people are Filipinos, they shouldn't be here, and it you have to position yourself differently then with regard to indigeneity when you realize that sometimes the most marginal of the marginalized are the people who can't claim indigeneity and are sometimes rejected by those who do claim indigeneity. So it really complicates how we align ourselves as anthropologists and other social scientists when you take on board the position of stateless people. So I'll leave it at that here.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Well, this is always a very exciting time, at least as far as I'm concerned. I know there are a couple of people in the chat who have made some comments, and I guess I would.
Virginia, can
Oh.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I respond to Greg really quickly,
Okay,
because
go
I'm
ahead.
grateful that he brought that up. And I thank you, Greg, for reminding us about this whole issue of indigeneity. I think definitely in a place like Sabah, in many parts of Asia, I think, this whole conversation about the nexus between, the migrant body. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that, do we need another framework rather than saying that the opposite of statelessness is indigeneity, right? And I often ask this simply because that is leading us into a pathway that opposes, it adds to that whole idea of the hijack, the overtake, these people are coming for our jobs and now our identity. And often I feel we are left with that narrative, right? That a person is thus not stateless, they've been here forever, and therefore the opposite to that is that they do have some claim to an indigenous identity. I'm just kind of wondering right now, and I think this is a great space for us to discuss this, in the way in which we should explore whether there are other, how do I say, binary existence, because it isn't binary, right? I mean, statelessness in itself is not a two-dimensional homogeneous category. Many stateless people within, who exist are not each other's allies as well. It's the same thing. Not all women are women's allies. And so I'm just sort of like saying that I think if we're having this conversation about the way in which we're trying to figure out ways in which we can argue for, a much more inclusive world. And I totally understand Trump hates the word DEI, and so by proxy, everybody else who has money to give to funding for activism, is that I'm sort of uncomfortable, I think, today with the way in which we're pitting indigenous persons in a place like Sabah. As a person with indigenous identity, my mom's an indigenous woman from Sabah. It's just like Anne's father is indigenous to Sabah. And I often feel that for someone like Anne and I to come out and say, hey, I think statelessness is an important issue, we're immediately pegged as traitors of an entire civilization. How dare you come here and go against your forefathers? Because you're essentially supporting the other. So I'm just kind of wondering how we can sort of proceed with that, and I'm really looking forward to hearing everyone's wisdom on the matter. Thank you.
Thanks, Vila. Greg, do you want to respond, or can we open up?
Let's open up.
Okay, let's open up. I'm quite sure that there are a number of people who would like to make comments or ask questions, etc. All I ask is that you unmute yourself and you I don't know, you let us see you. Okay. Anybody? Come on. Okay. But Stephen, I actually meant other people. Other people who are listening here. Muggsy, come on. You've been saying all sorts of things. No?
I've
In the
not
chat?
I've not said anything that Amanda hadn't already said. It's
It
really
doesn't
the,
matter. You're from South Africa. She's not. So, yeah.
it's the real question is that the notion of the nation state. Why are we so fixated on it? You say it's simply because of the power relations, the global power relations and the local power relations, which enable the nation state to keep going. But that's empirically, you're right. But intellectually, we shouldn't let ourselves be trapped that way. And that's really what I think we need to ask about questions about as intellectuals, not as kind of just fitting in with what goes on. We need to question these basic principles that the world seems to operate on, in which people like Trump, and I can list the names, you all know the names, he just represents them worst for us at the moment.
Musk is South African, right? Elon Musk is South African.
He was born in South Africa, and he lived in a state which was an apartheid state, which conditioned him to be the kind of person he is, the nationalist, the white supremacist. I mean, I do the same, and I had.
I was just teasing you. I was just teasing you. Wait, go ahead. Yeah, wait a second. Yeah.
Something can I say something as a foreigner living now in South Africa?
Right.
I've been out and in here for years now. I've been here for 6 months, and
where is here? Cape Town, Johannesburg. Where are you?
In
Cape Town. Okay.
Yes, but I'm working in Western Cape now. So the funny thing is that every single South African whom I asked about Elon Musk doesn't consider him South African. He's been out of South Africa so long that everybody tells me that he's not South African, he's American, even though he probably still has his South African passport. May I have a question out of this discussion? Does any of you have any contacts with Guatemalan people? Because the conference will be in Guatemala and would like to get in touch with one of their universities, but I can't find anybody.
Well, I can answer that probably better than most people. I think the best thing to do is to email Ricardo Fagoaga, who is the organizer. He's Mexican, but the conference is in Guatemala. There is no Guatemalan Anthropological Association, but he knows a lot of it. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Stephen, I'm sorry I cut you off. You raised your hand, didn't you?
Oh, yes, I did.
Yes, you did.
If nobody else wants to speak.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I had not a response, but I sort of wanted to follow up on what is it Villashini? Sorry, am I saying the name right?
Just call me Villa.
Villa. Thank you so much for your comment and your comments about indigeneity and issues around that. I had a comment regarding, because one issue with Rohingya people, for example, their very statelessness and protracted and now extreme refugee condition is all based around issues of denial or conflicts or disagreements about how indigenous they are or they are not. And I think this can cause more, maybe fixating on this can cause more problems than it solves in some ways. Rohingya people themselves advocating that they are original members of Myanmar from whatever arbitrary date that the government sets, pre-British colonialism or whatever, then means that they have to deny that there were movements of people in a time when borders didn't function in the same way as they do now, and in a time when the movement of people was much more fluid than it is now. So it sort of forces people to, in that context, have a more state-centric way of thinking and forcing them to make their own identities fit that somehow when it's not going to. And the solution, I would think, really comes back to what I was already saying, which is even for Myanmar as well, the rights of non-citizens, because after all, other people who are considered to be foreigners were expelled at the point of like decolonization and things like that. So just as issues about rights of non-citizens still exist in Japan, or people who, like Rara or other people, live as long-term stateless, I think those issues also apply to places like Myanmar or like Burma, where they're causing huge problems with ethnic minorities. And the Rohingya are not the only ones who are suffering because of their ethnic minority status. But I just thought I'd add that. I hope, I don't know if anyone has any comments on what I said. I hope that makes sense.
Maybe that I did see in the chat a very long intervention by Cassio. Cassio, do you want to unmute yourself and show us here? Or do you want me to read it? Cassio Brancaleone? Let's see. Cassio Brancaleone. Cassio, are you there? You just wrote, okay, I'll do it. Chat. Let's see. He writes, or he wrote, but the power of the nation state has always been shaped by the structures of economic power and in the imperatives of social stratification, which have inevitably operated selectively over who could become a concrete subject of rights. Perhaps neither a return to a normative ideal of the rule of law, which never truly existed for most of the world's populations, especially the poorest, nor a Kantian project of the global state that would bring us perpetual peace will suffice. Perhaps we ought to look more generously toward something, quote, in between, a de facto form of justice grounded in custom, usage, and mutual aid practices, nourished by subaltern peoples and oppressed communities around the world. Michelle, you want to say something? Because you just said it, Cassio, the power of the nation state comes from the ideological making of a nation and an entity one is willing to die for. Okay. I get either. Who is this?
Oh, it's
Sorry.
Michelle.
Oh, it's Michelle. Go ahead, Michelle.
Well, the question is, it's nice for us, these academics, multilingual, most of us speaking 2, 3, or 4 languages, to go on about sort of the philosophy of nation states, but most people are very much tied to nation states, whether you're the Han in China, the Anglo-American of the United States, the more the ethnic French of France, et cetera, et cetera. I think we underestimate the power, the psychological power of belonging to a group, of being tied to this group or the destiny of this group. And this is reinforced by various types of religious belief, of other ideological forms. Of at the end of the day, it is the creating of the other is a very powerful force, sadly. And unfortunately, those have, I guess, very dire consequences for many people. So I think it's very, perhaps, I guess, we must not project our very cosmopolitan, multicultural existences to much of the world's population. So that's my comment.
Yeah. Does anybody want to respond to that? You can too, Muggsy. Go ahead.
I mean, I really like what Cassio said. I think, and I think it's a first step, but we haven't got anywhere near. We have to go a lot further. I think Michelle, the problem is it's a culturalist argument that Michelle is presenting, as if ideas and ideational stuff is what drives us. And yes, it does, and yes, and no, it doesn't. In some respects, and we've actually got to see the interaction between the power relations, the material world, and the ideological world, and start to interpret all of those and analyze them together rather than, well, because we have this history, we're going to do this. And we're all of the same religious, or we're all of the same regional area or whatever notion we have for creating boundaries around ourselves. We've got to break the boundaries. We've got to think about what created the boundaries and look beyond them and try and understand why they've come about. And if we can do that properly and clearly, then people may actually start to think again. Yeah, but I mean, this would be more than a webinar can deal with. It would be a long, extended few weeks in workshop.
Right,
And it would be
Muggsy.
worthwhile
In
doing.
some ways, it's a question of what anthropologists could or should do, right? And whether we have the power. I know you don't want to accept Michelle's argument, but I guess it's a question. Oh, Casio. Okay. Oh, okay, Greg. I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks, Virginia.
Sure.
I want to address part of what Casio said, this need for looking in between de facto forms of justice grounded in custom, usage, and mutual aid practices. I recently had a student who looked at the situation of the Sangir people, a group from the islands at the northern tip of Indonesia, north of Sulawesi, who are a stateless community in southern Mindanao and the islands off of Mindanao. Now, to the Sangir, this is still part of their cultural world. They had not, there wasn't a strict boundary until the Spanish and the Dutch negotiated the colonial boundary, which has largely been maintained, changed a little in negotiations between the Philippines and Indonesia. But what she found was, although they were not legal citizens of the Philippines, they were often accepted in local village communities, involved in mutual aid societies. And in fact, some barrio headmen even allowed them to vote in local elections, which is technically illegal, but they were allowed to do it at the local level. Now, the situation has changed now due to an agreement with Indonesia and the Philippines that is allowing this diasporic Indonesian population of the Sangir to get Indonesian citizenship. The first diasporic population of Indonesians who've been granted that pathway. It's a little harder for them to get Philippine citizenship if they want. Their own feeling is that, well, both the Philippines and Indonesia are home. So, I think it's interesting to consider this particular case of another betwixt and between stateless population, although now on the route to getting citizenship, and to see that there have been these forms of de facto arrangements that have allowed accommodations, forms of belonging and such. And I think that's another dimension of what anthropologists can bring to the study of statelessness, these informal arrangements by which people can be considered not just denizens, but community members, despite their not being citizens of the country in which they're resident. It's just a very contrasting case to that of the Bajau Laut in Sabah. Thanks.
Yeah, Amanda needs to leave, right? Am I right? Yeah. So
yeah, I've got about 6 minutes.
yeah, there you go. Okay, so do you want to say something? Because a lot of this discussion about nation state and coloniality and sovereignty, it wasn't really necessarily started by you, but you spoke about it.
Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation that we're having, and I'm thinking back to how methodologically, as ethnographers, we can intervene in this conundrum here. I really like, Greg, what you were saying about in response to Cassio's point here about what other kinds of more localized forms of belonging can we shed light on that have been practiced in alternative to formal exclusion from nation states. I also really love Vila's point about language and even interrogating the English word of statelessness, which by the form of the word, upholds the state as the default norm from which stateless people are excluded. And I wonder how this English term of statelessness is like how do other communities, how do other languages talk about this condition of statelessness? And are there versions of it that do not centralize the state as the default form of being? Thank you.
Thanks. I guess I should say maybe Greg knows better. I don't know if it's necessarily the language. I don't really know whether there's a difference between Canada and the US, but I actually don't hear the word statelessness very often here in the US. Well, perhaps Trump will introduce it, but I don't actually hear it. I mean, they talk a lot about undocumented workers, illegal migration from Mexico, all sorts of things, but not statelessness. Am I wrong, Greg? Greg, am I wrong?
Even in Malaysia, stateless people are amalgamated in a larger category of illegal migrants along illegal immigrants, often is the term, and not differentiated. I mean, I think there is a differential salience of stateless people depending upon the specific context and such. I think that, again, in America, there are other terms that are more salient, and there are certainly, undocumented migrants. You do hear that. And that kind of is where a lot of the stateless people would fit in. So, I mean, statelessness is not always a salient emic term in all contexts.
Right. Amanda, before you go,
I just want to respond to
wait
that.
a second.
Sarah, you
Wait
can
a second. Wait, Lara, just in case, because Amanda needs to leave. Right?
Oh,
Probably.
no worries. Oh, this is such an exciting conversation, though. I really do want to keep listening, but I'll stop for now. I'd love to hear what Lara thinks, and I'll slip out when I'm able to, but I'll try to hang on as long as possible.
All right, thanks a lot, Lara. Okay.
Oh, I just want to share some of the label on the ID cards in the different places. I interviewed people in Philippines. They have an ID card, label them as a stateless. And in Japan, my ID card is labeled as mukokuseki, which means stateless. In Chinese, 无国籍, no nationality. And in the Golan Heights, those people, they're on their travel document, they are labeled their nationality or citizenship labeled as undefined. Yeah.
Is it in Hebrew or Arabic you're talking about?
In English.
Hebrew or Arabic? Oh, in English.
In English. Yeah, in English travel document. And in I think in Brunei, it's undefined or something as well, not stateless, but undefined or something.
Declared on, yeah, I don't know.
I
look.
think I have the picture of their ID cards, but I forgot all the wording.
Send it to
Yeah,
me.
that's all I want to share with that. Yeah.
I can read both Hebrew and Arabic, so. Okay, anybody else? It's now.
I think Vila had a comment.
Oh, Vila, okay.
Thanks so much, Lara, for that. And, Amanda, also, thank you so much for that. I think using the word stateless is like using the word homeless. it denotes that, you know, it's an issue of non-belonging. But of course, the counter to homeless today is houseless, right? Because the idea is that you can't call a person homeless because it also means that you don't have community, you don't have a sense of belonging, you don't have an identity, and you are completely without, you're completely stripped. So I think the counter to that has always, or is now emerging as houselessness, or a person with no home. Statelessness, I think, is I don't know what the opposite or the counter to statelessness is in English. In Malaysia, I think Greg has just put it in, or in the Malay language, is orang yang tiada warga negara, right? Tanpa warga negara, a person without citizenship. And citizenship here in this aspect is that you are without a document. You don't have a document. And of course, a document is incredibly powerful. And so we now give power to an entire document, a structure, right? But it doesn't denote that you don't belong in that sense. It's just that you are without a set of rights that a person with that particular document has. And, you know, ultimately, the idea has been in many parts of the world that if you don't have that one particular formal document, is to replace it with another set of papers or passes and whatnot. So I think, you know, essentially, I think this idea about statelessness is that you either don't belong. And also, to respond very quickly to the conversation between Michelle and Casio, was this whole idea of loyalty. And I think, you know, loyalty for me is it's so ironic, because I know many people with citizenship in different parts of the world who have zero loyalty to their country, right? And the whole idea is that we're constantly forcing people who are stateless to perform and re-perform these ideas and these notions of loyalty that can never be fulfilled. I think it's a performance that is doomed to failure if you are forced to perform it. So I think, you know, in trying to justify one's access to documents, is that you got to do the deed in the performance of loyalty, which is, in fact, for me, it's a doomed cause. There's no way one can perform loyalty. You know, we do a lot of, you see people from the community pick up the language, learn the culture, you know, to justify belonging. But that does not in any way is linked to this notion of loyalty, I think, especially to the nation state or little Napoleons that run it. So I you know, that's what I wanted to say. And I wanted to thank everyone for their time, because I'm going to have to leave really soon too, but I'm going to hang in as long as possible.
All right, great. Anybody else? Thank you, Vila. Oh, Anne, go ahead. I see your hand.
Yeah, I think I just want to add a little bit in our recent experience working with indigenous communities who are also stateless. And this was due to borders that were being formed in their community, which separates them from Indonesia, Brunei, and Malaysia, Borneo, Sabah, Sarawak. So one thing that came from the community was that we can never be stateless, as indigenous belief, saying that we can never be stateless because we always have ties to our land. So I feel like the whole I feel like statelessness is an outside influence that disturbs, you know, what the community actually is. It's a foreign thing where in the beginning everybody belonged, but then suddenly colonization and borders separated people, and suddenly you're stateless, you're not stateless, you belong, you don't belong. So yeah, so just bringing that here, coming from the community themselves.
Thanks, Anne. I think I will ask if anybody else wants to say something. I guess I do in some ways. I particularly like the idea of talking about belonging, but I see your hand, Stephen, just a second. I also want to recognize that most, I don't know, governments of whatever, states or governments that claim sovereignty will draw distinctions between citizens and lots of other people who may live there. But they don't necessarily use the same terminology. They will talk about, sorry, this is a little confusing. Can you get rid of that so I can finish my comment without the screen? Is this Stephen?
I think it's Lara.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, no, that's fine. But I think most governments, as I said before, governments that claim sovereignty will draw distinctions between citizens and lots of other people who live there. But some of them actually distinguish between, oh, I don't know, people who don't have the right documents to live and work there, and people who may not be citizens but have, like I think it was Lara and me, who have documents to live and work there. Well, of course, I was a child, but I don't know. In some ways, again, what is the role of researchers, anthropologists, social scientists in general? I think I know Monksy is now gone, but I think Monksy wants us to fight for a different vision. I think maybe Amanda does too. But I think most of the world actually has deep nationalist things. Trump here is probably in some ways increasing the intensity of Canadian nationalism, not just or nationalism in lots of other places, without realizing it. But there are lots of people who he would like to expel from the US, and he's beginning it, and lots of people are challenging it. But so I do think there's a difference between belonging and governments differentiating their populations in different ways. So I don't know. Lara, okay, you wanted to show us something before we go?
Oh, I just found out the document I mentioned in Golan, they label them as undefined,
Right.
not stateless. It's undefined. Yeah, I can show you if you want the
That's all right.
document they have.
Do this for me directly, not in general. Stephen, you had your hand
Okay.
up a second.
Yeah, I wrote something in the comment as well, but I thought maybe maybe some more sociological perspectives can contribute to some of these discussions, so that especially because I'm focused on refugees and migrants in my research rather than focusing on statelessness. But there is an anthropologist, Lisa Malky, who's quite well known, who wrote the well-known paper, The National Order of Things, and how it's important for not just anthropologists, but all sorts of people involved in so-called refugee studies to avoid, the national lens, or to recreate this sort of nationalist perspective, so that perhaps, at least as scholars, we can sort of pour cold water on such, I guess, culturalist or sort of nationalist sentiments or perspectives by trying to show how they emerge. What are the economic, social, structural, historical conditions, or what are the political interests that are served by fanning or encouraging such sentiments, or encouraging ideas that the immigrants are the main problem, when in fact the main problems that even supporters of populist supporters of Trump probably face, that they may not realize it, are not the immigrant, it's something else. So those are probably the ways that scholars, I think, could try and contribute, as well as pointing out that the stateless person or the refugee or the asylum seeker or the undocumented migrant is not the enemy. As scholars, and maybe that's especially scholars who are activists, that should be important contribution, I would have thought.
But was it Villa? Did you say something about documents? I mean, the word often used here to counter the older term illegal aliens is undocumented workers, but that would not work because it really depends on the document.
Yeah, I think, obviously the whole state in not having documents essentially has given birth to many, many categories in itself, right? And I think that essentially complicates then the way in which we also have a hierarchy of belonging and a hierarchy of deservedness within the larger population. Greg is right. We would categorize majority of the people as irregular migrants, right? And not everyone is a migrant, but certainly I think the emphasis here is on irregularity of status. And I think, in the recent years, irregularity has been seen as the best default because you don't want to call anyone illegal. You certainly don't want its replacement illicitness to be used in that sense. And what is illicit is essentially the action in which one finds themselves in an area rather than the person itself. So, irregular was then the best word. And I think later on, there are also geographically locale identities, right? So you'll have littoral community, coastal temporary resident, the list goes on. And ultimately, I think members of the community then decide, depending on whether there are papers ascribed to certain identities, whether there's none, whether one community or one identity is perceived to be less problematic than the other by authority figures, you then will assume different categories, sometimes more than one at a time. But certainly the category of stateless remains to be the most problematic one, right? Because simply there's no recourse to it. There's what Catherine Allerton calls impossibility as method. There's no way around it, certainly in places like Malaysia, or if you look at the Rohingyans that are coming from the Arakan state, is that it's an impossibility. There's no way you should be existing in this scenario. So I think papers or documents by way of that has also made its way, certainly because you can forge them, you can use them for systematic existence. You've got a corrupted officer. And so papers are not the answer majority of the time. And I think essentially, because we're trying to ascribe different identities and different labels as a way of exploring ways out of statelessness, it still does not take away the lived reality of being stateless ultimately. So, this is just my response to, I think, Stephen and both yourself, Virginia.
Okay, thank you. It's now, let's see, 42
And I
minutes.
completely agree, by the way.
Who was that? Who was that? Oh, Stephen.
I mean, it's the violence of the state to make people stateless or to not give them rights if they are stateless.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. But I would like to bring this to a close. But Greg, comments, questions? You periodically wrote in the chat room, but this is your thing.
Yeah, let me just thank everybody, not just the presenters, but the audience members as well, for all their questions. And I hope what this has revealed is that the study of statelessness just opens up some of the most fundamental questions that the social sciences can address. We've had to look at notions of national sovereignty, colonial inheritance, indigeneity, identity, both in terms of lived experience and in terms of documentary attribution, belonging and such. And studying statelessness, really the most marginal of the marginalized, really puts into perspective how much we need to question some of these most fundamental notions that we sometimes take for granted as being illuminating in other contexts. So hopefully, people are taking away from that statelessness is one of those issues, one of those topics of study that really gets us to question our most fundamental conceptualizations and our most fundamental personal stances in terms of how we align ourselves with various people with whom we interact in the field and in our own communities and places of residence. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Greg. I gather it's Stephen's birthday. It's a good thing to end with, right? Happy birthday, Stephen.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. And thank you all. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Vila. Thank you, Stephen. I guess Amanda has left. Thank you, Lara, and thank you, Anne. So, and thank you to our wonderful audience.
Thank
And
you.
thanks for
Thanks,
moderating so
everyone.
nicely, Virginia.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you,
Thank you,
Virginia. Thank you,
Virginia.
Greg. See you guys.
Thank
Bye.
you, Greg.
Bye.